When you look at the Middle East, you see the headlines, right? Conflict, diplomacy, endless division. But what if I told you that to really get what's happening today, you can't just read the news? Nope. You have to become an archaeologist. You have to be willing to dig. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to excavate the layers of history, myth, and politics that define one of the most complex conflicts on Earth.
And really, that is the question at the very heart of it all. How do stories that were written down thousands of years ago become the blueprints for today's geopolitics? How do ancient identities end up clashing on the modern world stage? Because, let's be clear, this isn't just about ancient history. It's about how that history is being used right here, right now. So here's our plan of attack, our roadmap for this little excavation. We're going to start with the present-day echoes of the dispute. Then we'll look at the modern geopolitical chessboard. From there, we'll dig down into how the state was created in the 20th century, and then go all the way to the bedrock, where archaeology and old narratives collide. And finally, we'll come back up to the surface to really understand the core problem. 2 claims, 1 piece of land.
Okay, so let's begin our dig. We're starting at the top layer, the crisis, just as we see it today.
You know, it's so easy to get lost in the day-to-day headlines, the missile strikes, the angry debates at the UN. But none of these things are happening in a vacuum. They're actually just the latest, loudest echoes of a story that's been unfolding for more than 3,000 years. So to get the real picture, we kind of have to tune out the noise and grab our shovels. So our first layer of digging isn't really in the dirt at all. It's on the global chessboard, because this is not just a regional fight. Let's take a look at the key power players on the board as things stand in 2026. And what's so fascinating here isn't just who is playing, but the crazy, complicated game they're all in. I mean, look at this. You've got Iran and its proxies, and they're basically masters of this asymmetric conflict, using groups like Hamas and Hezbollah to constantly poke and pressure Israel without starting a full-blown war. Then you've got the United Nations, which is, well, it's often paralyzed, stuck between the US veto protecting Israel and Russia and China's vetoes on the other side. And speaking of them, they're playing the role of strategic opportunists. China's trying to be an economic mediator to keep the oil flowing, while Russia uses the chaos to cozy up to Iran and, maybe most importantly, to pull the West's attention and money away from other places, like Ukraine. It's this incredibly complex dance, and everyone's got their own agenda. Okay, time to dig a little deeper. We're going past the modern players, down to the 20th century foundations. This is where the political reality we're all looking at today was really hammered into shape. So it really starts to kick off in the late 1800s. In Europe, anti-Semitism is everywhere. And in response, a new idea starts to take hold: political Zionism. It's a nationalist movement with a pretty clear goal: create a safe, secure nation-state for the Jewish people. This idea fuels immigration and the building of what was essentially a state in waiting. Okay, fast forward to 1947. The UN steps in and proposes splitting the land into 2 states. The Jewish leadership says yes, the Arab leadership says no, seeing it as a deep injustice. Then, in 1948, Israel declares independence and is immediately invaded by 5 Arab armies. Israel survives, even expands its borders, but for Palestinians, this is the Nakba, or the catastrophe. It creates a massive refugee crisis that's still with us. And then, bam, 1967, the Six-Day War completely redraws the map, leaving territories like the West Bank under Israeli military control. And this control of territory, this is where we hit a fundamental clash of worldviews. Is it expansionism or is it pure survival? Critics will argue that Israel uses history, even the Bible, as a kind of ancient deed to legitimize the occupation and settlement of Palestinian land. But on the other hand, Israel and its supporters see it from a completely different angle: national security. They'll point to a map and show you how tiny the country is, and they'll argue that controlling the high ground in the West Bank isn't about empire, it's about strategic depth, a defensive buffer zone that they see as absolutely necessary to survive in a hostile neighborhood. All right, now we dig to the deepest layer. We're going beneath all the 20th century politics, all the way down to the foundational stories themselves. We're hitting the mythic bedrock of identity. This is where the archaeology clashes with the narrative. The traditional claim to the land, the one we all know, is rooted right in the Bible, right? The epic story of the Exodus from Egypt, the wandering in the desert, and then the military conquest of Canaan. This story establishes the whole idea of a promised land, a divine contract, a right to the territory given by God. But here's the thing: modern archaeology tells a completely different story. After decades of digging, they found 0 evidence of a huge mass migration out of Egypt. Instead, the scientific consensus now suggests that the first Israelites were probably local Canaanite groups, shepherds, nomads, people who were already there, who just gradually developed their own distinct culture up in the hills. So the story isn't one of an outside conquest, but of an internal evolution. And this gets to a really, really crucial point. The power of that foundational myth, it's not about whether it's historically accurate down to the last detail. As the source material puts it so well, it's not a historical lie. It's the cultural mortar of a people. Think of it like cultural glue. Its job was to take all these different tribes and unite them into one nation, forging a single identity around a shared story and a shared destiny. It was that powerful story of a divinely promised land that kept a cultural identity alive for 2,000 years in exile. And it was that same story that fueled the modern political movement to create a state. So now we have all the pieces, don't we? We've dug through the modern geopolitics, the 20th century history, and the deep foundational myths. So let's come back to the surface and bring all those layers with us so we can finally see the core of the conflict for what it is. When you peel back every single layer, when you strip it all away, this is what you find. At its absolute essence, the conflict is a tragedy. It's the collision of two valid, deeply held national stories that are fighting for the exact same tiny piece of land. For the Jewish people, it's the end of a 2,000-year-old dream of returning home and the absolute necessity of a safe place after centuries of persecution. And for the Palestinian people, it is a constant, ongoing struggle for their own self-determination and a fight against the occupation of their ancestral home. Which leaves us with a final and pretty profound question. Archaeology can show us how identities are built, how stories are made, but politics in 2026 shows us that once those stories become sovereign, once they become the undeniable truth for millions of people, they have the power to move armies and bring global diplomacy to a grinding halt. So the ultimate question really is this. When the story itself is the territory, how in the world do you ever draw a map to peace?